Hello, this is Jessie of Jessie at Home, and this is the Stitchopedia. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do the knit linen stitch. I'm going to show you how to do it in rows, and I'm also going to explain to you how to do it in the round. So, to start off, if you're working in rows, you need an even number of stitches. You need to cast on an even number. If you're working in rounds, you need to cast on an odd number, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Here I've started a front side row. I'm going to finish the front side row, and then I'll do a back side row, and then another front side row, so you'll get to see all the turns, and I'll explain what you need to do if you're working in the round. So, here you can see the linen stitch. This is the front. And then the back kind of looks a lot like a seed stitch. So let me show you the front of the linen stitch, how to do this. What you're doing is you're going to slip, knit all the way across. Now when you slip, you wrap your yarn in front. You slip one purlwise, and then you knit the next stitch. Now you're going to slip one purlwise with your yarn in front again, and knit the next stitch. Slip one purlwise with the yarn in front, knit the next stitch. Slip one purlwise with the yarn in front, knit the next stitch. Okay, you do that till you get to the end of the row. Now we're going to turn and we're going to do the back row, the wrong side row. And it's the same idea, only with purl. You are going to slip one purlwise and then purl. Slip one purlwise and then purl. They're always being slipped purlwise. This time you're actually putting the yarn in back. So slip one purlwise with the yarn in back. So see how the yarn's in back of my work? I'm going to slip one purlwise. Now I'm going to purl one, which means the yarn needs to be pulled to the front, and I purl a stitch. Slip one purlwise with the yarn in back. Now purl, slip one purlwise with the yarn in back, and purl, slip one with the yarn in back, purl, slip one with the yarn in back, purl, and slip one with the yarn in back, and purl. I'm going to show you the beginning of the knit round, and then we'll talk a little bit about, knit row, and then we'll talk a little bit about doing this in rounds, and if you want to start with the slip or the knit and all of that. I'll explain that in a moment. So let's start the knit row again. Sorry. Okay, so our first stitch is a slip one purlwise with the yarn in front. So the yarn in front of the needle, slip one purlwise, and then we knit. Oops. Slip one purlwise with the yarn in front, and then knit. Slip one with the yarn in front, and then knit. Now you'll notice what we're doing is this stitch had been purled before, so now we're slipping it. So we worked the stitch on the last row, and this row we're going to slip it. This stitch had been slipped on the last row. You see how there's a little piece of yarn in front of it? That's because we slipped it. So this time we're actually going to work this stitch, so we're going to knit it. It's a good way to know if you put your work down, you can't remember where you were. You can see that the stitch was worked in the last round. That means that in this round it's a slip, or in this row. And you can see that this stitch was slipped in the last row, which means in this row you're actually working the stitch. And you do that all the way to the end. When you work in rows, you can either do what I've done, which is start each row with a slip stitch, Or you can start each row with the knit stitch on the knit side and the purl stitch on the purl side. It really is up to you. Try it the way I did it with the slip stitches first, then try it again with the knit or the purl stitches first. See which look you like better and go with that. The important thing is what you like. Now, if you're working in rounds, like I said before, you want to cast on an odd number. In rows, you cast on an even number. In rounds, you cast on an odd number. And the reason for that is on round 1, if you start with a slip and you have an odd number, you'll end with a slip. And then what do you do after you slip? You knit, right? And for this pattern to work, you should be slipping into all of the knit stitches and knitting into all of the slip stitches if you're working in the round and always working from the same side. So if you start with a slip and you end with a slip, then your next stitch is a knit. And that round 2, you'll start with a knit and you'll end with a knit. Your next stitch is a slip. So for round 3, you'll start with a slip and you'll end with a slip. And everything will line up nicely. If you cast on an even number of stitches and you work in the round, then every time you go to the next round, you've doubled something up. You'll start with a slip, you'll end with a knit, and then you'll start with a slip, you'll end with a knit, and then you'll have to start with a knit. So you'll have ending with a knit and starting with a knit in order to make the pattern line up, and you'll get a jog. Whereas if you do an odd number of stitches on your cast on, then you can always just go knit, slip all the way around, and you won't get a jog, that little line in your rounds. When you see linen stitch worked in the rounds and you can see where the round happened, where the round marker was, where the seam is, it's because it was done with an even number of stitches instead of an odd number of stitches. So that'll save you a little bit of frustration there if you're trying to look for a nice, pretty, seamless seam. All right, so here we go. A little closer view of the front side of your linen stitch where you can see the knits and the slips and the knits and the slips, and the back side of your linen stitch where you can see the purls. And it really looks like seed stitch on the back, because I think the purls and the slips kind of double up on top of each other, which gives this really nifty little seed stitch look. If you were wondering what I used to do this demo, I have a US 10 or 6 millimeter. I don't know if you can see that. The camera's not going to focus on it. It's a US 10 or 6 millimeter knitting needles, and this yarn is actually Barocco vintage chunky. So those are the yarn and the needles that I used. I hope this little tutorial helped you out with your linen stitch. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.